At 2:11 Coalition Standard Time, every sensor aboard the patrol cruiser Vigil of Dawn went blind. No alarms came first. No warning sirens. No shouted commands from frightened officers. One moment, Commander Vale Corrin was reviewing routine border scans along the Silent Belt, a region of dead systems so empty it had become a punishment posting for ambitious officers. And next, every screen on his bridge turned black. The stars outside still burned in silence. But inside the ship, every authorized display, from navigation glass to tactical overlays to emergency backups older than Vale himself, showed only darkness. Then a symbol appeared. Not the crest of the Galactic Coalition, not military encryption, not any known species registry. A white circle, cracked down the center, hanging above a blue world with no moon. Vale stood so quickly his command chair struck the floor behind him. Nobody on the bridge moved, because every officer there recognized the image, even if they had only seen it once. Buried in old Academy history files no one believed mattered. Earth, not as it was recorded in museums, as it had been before it died. "Impossible," whispered Lieutenant Saris at Tactical, her silver skin fading pale. That mark was removed from all classified archives. Vale's throat felt suddenly dry. Replay source origin. Her fingers flew across the console, but her expression only worsened. "It isn't coming from outside the ship, Commander." Silence spread across the bridge like freezing water. "Say that again." Saris turned slowly. "It's coming from inside our systems. Something bypassed every firewall, every military seal, every quantum lock. It didn't hack us. It was already here." Before anyone could answer, the black screen changed. Text appeared. Ancient Terran military code, translated automatically beneath it. "Do not open the gate." For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Navigator Ilian gave a nervous laugh that died almost immediately. "There is no gate. This sector is dead. No colonies. No stations. No!" The ship lurched violently. Not from impact, from gravity. Every loose object on the bridge slammed sideways, as if some invisible giant had grabbed the cruiser and pulled. Outside the forward glass, the dead world below them, the ash-covered planet designated Silent Belt 9 began to glow. Not across the surface. From beneath it, lines of blue-white light spread under continents, like veins waking beneath old skin. Ancient oceans, long evaporated, reflected ghost light from nowhere. Mountain ranges cracked open with slow, deliberate motion. Commander Vale stepped forward, unable to stop himself. "No!" Because he was looking at something no patrol report had ever mentioned. Something buried under the corpse of a world. A structure, massive, circular, artificial, a ring so large it wrapped beneath the planet's crust itself, rising now like a machine the size of a god turning in its sleep. Lieutenant Saris' voice broke first. "Commander, we're receiving audio. Play it." Static filled the bridge. Then a voice. Human. Old. Calm. Terrifyingly calm. "If you are hearing this, then containment has failed." Every officer froze. The voice continued, steady as stone. "If coalition vessels have returned to this border, then history has repeated its favorite mistake. You came looking for ghosts. Instead, you found the door. The planet below them split open. The ring rose higher. Ancient engines older than the coalition itself thundered awake beneath a dead sky. Vale felt something colder than fear settle into his chest, because he understood, in that moment, that humanity had never vanished. Humanity had been standing guard, and whatever they had been guarding was waking up. The first rule of command was simple. When you did not understand what was happening, you controlled what you could. Commander Vale Corrin broke that rule 30 seconds later. "Full retreat," he ordered, his voice sharp enough to cut to the panic rising across the bridge. "Pull us out of orbit. Maximum distance. Now!" The engines answered instantly. The Vigil of Dawn turning hard against the gravity pulled the awakening planet below. Warning lights flashed crimson across every console. The artificial ring buried beneath Silent Belt. 9 continued to rise, enormous sections of metal emerging through oceans of ash like the bones of some sleeping titan forcing itself back into the world. But the cruiser did not move. Lieutenant Saris looked up from navigation. her expression drained of all color. "We're locked." Vale stepped to her station. "Explain." "Something has us in a gravity well, but it isn't the planet. It's artificial, controlled. Whatever is under that surface is holding us here." The bridge fell silent again, not trapped by a weapon, held, as if something below had reached upward and simply decided they were not leaving. Vale turned toward the black screen, still carrying the cracked Earth symbol. His instincts screamed that this was wrong on a level beyond military protocol. Silent belt postings were supposed to be boring. Empty systems, dead worlds, forgotten borders. Instead, he was staring at proof that history itself might be a lie. "Open direct channel to Coalition Central," he said. Saris hesitated. "It's already open." That was worse. The main screen shifted again, not by command, but by permission they had never given. A secure council chamber appeared, and inside it stood Chancellor Orin himself, flanked by 2 intelligence officers and one figure Vale did not recognize. An old woman. Human. For one disorienting second, nobody on the bridge remembered how to breathe. Humanity was extinct. That was not history. That was fact. Yet the woman standing beside the Chancellor looked very alive, her silver hair tied back, her uniform dark and severe. On her chest was the same symbol, Earth without a moon. The Chancellor spoke first. "Commander Corrin, you are ordered to remain exactly where you are." Vale stared. "Sir," with respect, "there is a planet opening beneath my ship and a human voice warning us about containment failure. I would appreciate less mystery and more truth." The old woman smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "At least one of you still gets angry before dying." Her voice was calm, but there was iron in it. "My name is Admiral Mar Ellison, Human Expeditionary Command. And before you ask, yes, we know your records say we're dead. We encourage that misunderstanding." Vale's bridge officers exchanged stunned looks. The Chancellor's face carried the weight of someone forced to admit a terrible old sin. "Commander, there are truths the Coalition buried generations ago. We did not erase humanity, but we allowed the galaxy to believe they were gone." "Why?" The question left Vale before protocol could stop it. Why would an entire civilization vanish by choice? Admiral Ellison stepped closer to the screen. "Because extinction is safer than being remembered." Before Vale could demand clarification, the historian beside the Chancellor finally spoke. He was thin, insect-like, one of the Lenny archive cast, with black eyes too large for comfort. Archivist Sol Theron. Vale recognized the name instantly. He was the Coalition's keeper of forbidden records, the kind of scholar governments only admitted existed during disasters. Theron unfolded his hands carefully. "Commander, what you found in the Silent Belt is not a ruin. It is a prison." No one on the bridge moved. "The official record says Earth died during lunar collapse. That is technically true, but what it does not say is why the moon shattered." Vale felt his pulse hammering. Theron continued. 211 years ago, something entered soul space from beyond mapped territory. It did not invade in the traditional sense. It erased colonies first. Ships vanished from records while survivors still stood inside them. Entire stations forgot their own names. Species databases rewrote themselves. Civilizations were not destroyed. They were removed. Lieutenant Saris whispered, "That's impossible." Admiral Ellison answered without looking at her. "No, impossible is surviving it." She folded her hands behind her back. Humanity discovered the pattern too late. Earth became the anchor point. Our moon was destroyed, trying to contain the breach. We evacuated what we could, and then we did something no species had ever dared. Her eyes locked on Vale. "We erased ourselves first." The words landed harder than any weapon. "We cut humanity out of galactic memory. Records, archives, trade maps, diplomatic history. We became a ghost by choice, because the thing hunting us fed on recognition. If it could not find us in memory, it could not finish the job." Vale looked down at the dead planet below, now splitting wider as the ancient ring rose further into the stars. "And now," Admiral Ellison's expression hardened, "now your patrol just woke the front door." As if the universe itself wished to confirm her words, every light on the bridge died again. The stars outside disappeared. And from somewhere beyond the ship, from somewhere that should not have existed at all, something enormous knocked once against reality. For one impossible second, Commander Vale Corrin thought the universe itself had gone blind. The stars outside the bridge vanished, not hidden, not obscured, but absent, as if space had been wiped clean by an invisible hand. Every familiar point of light, every navigation marker, every distant sun that had anchored sentient minds for thousands of years gone. In their place was only black, not darkness, absence. Lieutenant Saris made a sound Vale had never heard from her before, something between terror and disbelief. Our star maps are rewriting. She turned her console toward him with trembling hands. Entire sectors of Coalition space were disappearing from the navigation archive in real time. Civilized worlds blinked out of existence from official memory. Trade routes dissolved. Colonies became unmarked voids. Even the names were vanishing, letters erasing themselves as if ashamed to have ever existed. Vale stared. This is an attack. Archivist Aaron's voice came cold through the open channel. No, Commander, this is a greeting. The bridge lighting returned in a sudden pulse, and with it came another transmission, not from Coalition Command, not from the buried machine below, but from somewhere older. Every speaker aboard the Vigil of Dawn activated at once. A voice spoke. It did not sound alien. That was what made it horrifying. It sounded like someone trying to imitate every voice Vale had ever trusted, and failing by a fraction too small for comfort. We remember you. Several crew members physically recoiled. We remember Earth. The crack symbol on the screen shattered into static. Admiral Mara Ellison did not flinch. Instead, she reached her collar and pressed a single control. Across the dead system, space answered. At first, Vale thought stars were returning. Then he realized they were ships. One by one, then by dozens, then by impossible hundreds, massive vessels emerged from nothing. Not warping in, not arriving, but decloaking from positions they had occupied the entire time. They had been there all along, silent and invisible around the silent belt, like wolves waiting in snow. Human ships, not sleek Coalition cruisers built for diplomacy and clean lines. These were brutal things. Heavy armor, scar hulls, engines layered with redundant shielding. Every design choice screamed the same philosophy. Survive first, ask questions later. Some were clearly ancient, repaired 100 times over. Others were vast arc citadels, floating cities wrapped in weapons. One vessel alone was larger than Vale's entire patrol wing combined, its hull carrying the faded outline of oceans and continents where old Earth had once been painted. Lieutenant Ilian whispered, "How many?" Saris answered after scan. 291 confirmed. More signatures still resolving. Vale turned slowly toward Admiral Ellison. "You hit an entire civilization." Her answer was simple. "We hit a war." The human admiral's face was unreadable now, all softness gone. The Vale-born do not invade planets. They invade memory. They rewrite consensus until civilizations help erase themselves. They do not need armies when doubt is cheaper. Another tremor passed through the ship as the planetary ring below rose higher, ancient machinery locking into place around the broken world, like a seal reforging itself. "That structure," Vale said. "The gate?" Ellison nodded. "It is not a gate in the way you imagine. It is a wound, a place where reality was cut open the first time they entered. We built the ring to keep it shut." Vale's mind raced. "And my patrol, your arrival triggered old recognition protocols. Coalition signatures were never supposed to come this close again. The system assumed history had failed and began reactivation. There it was, the accusation hidden inside the explanation. History had failed, not the humans, the Coalition." Vale felt it settle into him like lead. "You let us believe you were dead." Ellison's eyes hardened. "We let you live long enough to matter." Before he could answer, the channel behind her erupted in alarms. Human officers moved fast, disciplined, without panic. One stepped to her side and spoke quietly. Admiral Ellison listened, then looked back at Vale. "The outer seal is weakening faster than predicted." Archivist Aaron's voice sharpened. "That should not be possible." Ellison gave a humorless smile. "It is impossible if they'd been listening longer than we thought. The ship-wide speakers activated again. Not the false voice this time. A child's voice. Human. Young. Calm. Admiral, she said, from somewhere deep inside the human fleet. The memory wall is bleeding. Every human officer on screen went still. Vale did not understand the phrase, but he understood the fear created. Ellison closed her eyes for one brief second. When she opened them, they looked like war. "Commander Corrin," she said, "I need your answer now." "For what?" She leaned closer to the screen. "When the door opens, do your people run, or do they remember what allies are for?" Commander Vale Corrin had spent most of his career believing courage was measured in battles. He learned, in that moment, that real courage was deciding whether to stay when every instinct screamed to flee. The bridge of the Vigil of Dawn was silent, except for the low hum of failing systems and the distant mechanical thunder rising from Silent Belt 9 below. The human fleet surrounded the dead world in a vast steel perimeter, every vessel positioned with mathematical precision around the awakening ring. 291 warships. Not an evacuation fleet. Not survivors hiding in fear. An execution line waiting for something old enough to terrify history itself. Vale looked at Admiral Mara Ellison on the screen and understood something that made his blood run cold. These people had not spent 2 centuries surviving. They had spent 2 centuries preparing. He opened a secure line to Coalition Central. "Chancellor," he said quietly, "how much of this did you know?" Chancellor Oren did not answer immediately. His silence was older than politics. "Enough," he admitted at last. "To be ashamed, that was answer enough. The Coalition had known. Maybe not all of it, maybe not the scale, but enough to bear the truth and pray distance would solve what courage had not." Vale looked out at the human fleet again. They had not prayed. They had built teeth. Before he could speak, alarms exploded across every deck. Lieutenant Saris snapped upright. "Commander, navigation archives are collapsing. Entire sectors are being overwritten." Her screen filled with cascading failures. Not damage. Replacement. Known colony worlds now displayed as barren rock. Populated systems were reclassified as uninhabited void. Emergency beacons from stations that absolutely existed returned no ownership records at all. Crew manifests aboard the Vigil itself began changing. Officer names vanished. Service histories blanked. For one horrifying second, Lieutenant Ilian's personnel file identified him as unknown biological presence. He stared at his own screen like it had betrayed him. "What is happening to us?" Archivist therein answered with grim certainty. "The Veilborn are touching the outer layer. They are testing memory integrity." Vale's jaw tightened. "Speak plainly." Therein's black eyes reflected too much. "They are asking reality whether you deserve to be remembered." The word should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, everyone on the bridge believed them instantly. Admiral Ellison stepped forward. "This is how they begin, not with fleets. With doubt. Histories change first, then borders, then identity. By the time they arrive physically, most civilizations have already helped erase themselves." She activated a star map. Red markers spread like infection. These are species officially recorded as extinct over the last 400 years. Most were listed as victims of plague, internal war, environmental collapse. Vale studied the names. "Too many. Too neat. Not extinct," he said. Ellison nodded. "Consumed. Forgotten so completely that even their murder looked natural." Lieutenant Saris whispered, "How many?" Archivist therein answered, "We do not know. That is the point." A new transmission arrived from Coalition archives. Not requested. Forced. The central display lit with old footage. Security recordings from centuries ago. Files so restricted even the Chancellor looked disturbed. Earth. Not the beautiful museum simulations. Real Earth. Cities under evacuation lights. Orbital platforms burning in low atmosphere. A moon breaking apart in silence above oceans full of reflected fire. Human ships leaving by the thousands. And something behind them, not visible, but wrong. The footage distorted around it. Buildings flickered. Entire sections of the image lost detail, as if reality itself refused to hold the shape. One line of text remained stable beneath the recording. Memory cascade event. Soul system containment failure. Vale watched billions of lives becoming history. And then he noticed something worse. The timestamp. The footage ended 3 days after official coalition records claimed humanity had already gone extinct. They had lied immediately. Not later. Immediately. His voice dropped. You left him alone. The Chancellor's face looked older than biology allowed. We were afraid. Admiral Ellison's response was quiet, which somehow made it sharper. Yes, we noticed. No one spoke after that. There was nothing to defend. Only truth. Then the dead planet split wider. The ring around Silent Belt, 9 locked into full alignment with sound so deep it vibrated through bone rather than air. Blue-white energy surged across its surface. And for the first time, Vale saw what lay inside the center. Not machinery. A hole. A perfect black circle where stars should have been visible and were not. Not darkness. An absence so complete the mind rejected it. The wound. The gate. Lieutenant Sarah's voice cracked. Commander, something is coming through. At first it looked like shadows moving behind glass. Then shapes. Ships. Huge. Silent. Angular in ways geometry should not allow. Their outline seemed unstable, as if every observer saw a slightly different version. No engine trails. No energy signatures. Just presence. The Veilborn had arrived, and the first thing they erased was the name of the star system they were standing in. For a moment, nobody on the bridge of the Vigil of Dawn spoke, because language itself felt suddenly fragile. Commander Vale Corrin stared at the tactical display, where the system, designation had once been. Gone. Not corrupted. Not hidden. Gone. The Coalition database no longer recognized the star they orbited, the dead planet below, or the patrol route that had brought them here. Navigation systems marked their location as unassigned void. Every record of this sector had been cleanly removed as if the place had never deserved a name. Lieutenant Saris whispered at first. If we leave now, how do we even find our way back? No one answered, because that was the real terror of the Veilborn. Not destruction, disconnection. A civilization could survive bombardment. It could rebuild from ruins. But what happened when the galaxy simply forgot where you were? When rescue never came because no one remembered you needed saving? That was how species died. Not screaming. Silently. Across the system, the first Veilborn vessels drifted through the open wound like predators entering familiar water. They were enormous, but size was not what made them monstrous. It was the way reality bent around them. Sensors refused stable readings. Visual feeds changed depending on who watched them. One officer swore a ship had 3 hulls. Another insisted it had none. Commander Vale trusted none of it. Only the fear. Only the fact that even Admiral Mara Ellison, who had looked at disaster with the calm of old stone, now stood absolutely still. She pressed a command into her console. Across the hidden human fleet, lights changed. Weapons unlocked. And for the first time since this began, Vale realized something worse than being trapped inside the Silent Belt. The humans had expected this exact moment. They had not hoped to avoid it. They had built their civilization around it. A human officer stepped beside Ellison, his voice low. Admiral, outer shield integrity down to 63%. Memory cascade accelerating. She nodded once. Then she looked directly at Vale. This is the point where your people decide what kind of history they deserve. Before he could respond, Chancellor Oren cut in sharply from Coalition Central. Commander Corrin, I am issuing immediate withdrawal authorization. Return to core space and deliver warning to the Council. That is your priority. Vale turned toward the screen. You want me to run? I want the Coalition to survive. Admiral Ellison's expression did not change. There it is, she said quietly. The old instinct. Oren's voice hardened. And what would you have me do, Admiral? Throw unprepared worlds into a war against an enemy they cannot even comprehend? No, she replied. I would have you stop calling survival the same thing as surrender. The Chancellor did not answer, because somewhere beneath the politics, he knew she was right. Vale felt the weight of every eye on the bridge. His crew, the Council, humanity, and beyond them, something ancient watching from the dark between stars. He should have ordered retreat. Military logic demanded it, but logic was what had abandoned Earth the first time. He stepped forward instead. "If we leave," he said slowly, "the Veil-born follow. They reach coalition space before the warning does. They turn every world into this." He pointed to the nameless system. To nothing. Chancellor Oren closed his eyes. Vale looked back to Admiral Ellison. "What do you need?" For the first time, something like respect crossed her face. The truth. She touched her console again. Across the system, space broke open. Not from the Veil-born. From humanity. The rest of the fleet decloaked. Not hundreds. Thousands. Arc citadels. Carrier fortresses. Rail platform moons wrapped in armor. Entire moving cities built around gun batteries and shield arrays. Vessels so large coalition classifications had no words for them. They had been hidden in the black between planets, inside debris fields, beneath sensor shadows, waiting, watching, preparing. The human species had not become refugees. They had become a border. Lieutenant Ilian stared openly. "My gods!" Admiral Ellison shook her head. "No, just survivors who got tired of burying children." She expanded the tactical field. Human fleet markers formed a perfect wall between the gate and the rest of known space. This is not an evacuation. It never was. This is Containment Line 0. Another transmission struck every ship in the system. This time it was not the Veil-born. It was human command. Every coalition captain, every civilian vessel within range, every listening post hidden in the dark received the same message. Clear, calm, final. You may leave now. No judgment, no dishonor. But if you stay inside this shield, understand this. Retreat ends here. We do not fall back. We do not negotiate. We do not permit this enemy to pass. Choose. The silence afterward was unbearable. Commander Vale looked at his bridge crew, at Saris, still pale but steady, at Ilian, terrified and furious, at officers who had signed up for patrol duty and somehow found themselves standing at the edge of reality. He realized none of them were waiting for orders. They were waiting for him to decide what kind of people they were. Then, from the wound at the center of the ring, a new signal emerged. No distortion, no false voice, just one sentence, spoken in perfect ancient English. "We remember what you did to Earth." And suddenly, everyone understood. This was never the beginning of the war, only the moment the enemy came back to finish it. Commander Vale Corrin had imagined many kinds of war: fleet engagements, border sieges, orbital bombardments, the clean brutality of weapons and numbers, where strategy could still pretend to be civilized. He had never imagined a war where the first casualty was his own name. The attack began without a single shot. Lieutenant Saris turned toward him, confusion clouding her silver eyes. "Commander?" She hesitated. For the first time since he had known her, she looked uncertain of herself. "I know I'm supposed to know you." The words hit harder than any missile. Around the bridge, officers froze. One communications specialist was staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Another kept repeating his homeworld's name under his breath like prayer, only to stop halfway through each time, unable to remember how it ended. Across every coalition vessel inside the shield, the same collapse spread. The Veil-born were not firing. They were asking memory to surrender. The tactical display flickered violently. Entire command trees unraveled. Access codes rewrote themselves. Crew histories blanked. Emergency protocols began rejecting their own officers as unauthorized biological anomalies. Commander Vale slammed his hand against the console. "Lock manual control. Disable autonomous authority. Right now." "Already gone," Saris replied, panic rising. The ship no longer recognized as a coalition. The word should not have made sense. Yet there they were. The Vigil of Dawn no longer believed it belonged to anyone. Outside, the first Veil-born ships drifted closer, silent and certain, like predators that had learned patience from extinction itself. Across the human fleet, however, there was no panic. There was preparation. Admiral Mara Ellison stood on the command deck of the Ark Citadel, Remembrance of Soul, watching reports streaming with the terrible calm of someone greeting an old enemy. Memory degradation? An officer answered instantly. Coalition vessels at 40% failure. Human line holding at 87. Analog vault stable. Oral chains intact. Ellison nodded. Deploy the children. Commander Vale, still connected through tactical relay, blinked. The children? She did not look at him. You want to know how we survived? This is how. Across the human fleet, secure channels opened. Not to admirals, not to weapons officers, but to classrooms, to family halls, to chambers buried deep inside generational warships where children sat in circles beneath old flags and older stars painted across metal ceilings. And they began to speak. Not commands, not codes, names. Cairo, Lagos, Kyoto, Rio de Janeiro, New Delhi, Cape Town, Jakarta, Toronto. The names spread from ship to ship like fire moving through dry forest. Children reciting cities they had never seen, oceans they had never touched, mountains they knew only from recordings older than their grandparents. Every human voice became an anchor, every remembered place a weapon. Vale watched in stunned silence as the human tactical network stabilized. Corrupted systems corrected themselves. Identification failures reversed. Ship markers returned. Lieutenant Saris whispered, as if afraid to interrupt something sacred. They're using memory as structural defense. Ellison finally looked at him. Yes, because machines can be rewritten. Stories have to be chosen. She activated another layer of data. Inside every human vessel were biological memory vaults. Genealogy spoken aloud for generations. History stored in living ritual. Names preserved by repetition instead of code. Humanity had made culture itself into military infrastructure. Not because it was poetic, because it worked. We learned after Earth, Ellison said. Never trust survival to systems that can forget you. The Veil-born pressed harder. Several coalition escorts drifted out of formation, their crews too disoriented to maintain control. One frigate opened fire on its own reflection in sensor ghosting. Another broadcast a desperate question across all channels. Does anyone remember where we came from? Vale felt something break inside him. This was not war. This was annihilation of self. He opened ship-wide comms manually. Every officer on the vigil of dawn looked toward him. He had no prepared speech, only truth. My name is Vale Corin, he said. I was born on Thessar Station above a planet with red oceans and storms that lasted for months. My mother repaired freight engines. My father lied badly at card games and pretended it was strategy. The bridge fell silent. He kept going. I joined the coalition because I believed civilization meant no one stood alone in the dark. I still believe that. So if you forget everything else tonight, remember this. We were here. We chose to stay. One by one, his officers began speaking. Names, worlds, parents, failures, promises. The vigil of dawn stopped shaking. Not physically. Something deeper. It remembered itself. Across coalition lines, other captains copied him. Then more. Species that had spent centuries negotiating differences suddenly clung to the same primitive defense. Tell your story before someone steals it. And for the first time since the Veilborn arrived, the advance slowed. The enemy had expected databases. They had found people. But outside the shield, the great ring around Silent Belt, 9 screamed like a wounded star. An officer on Ellison's deck turned, pale. Admiral, the containment wall is collapsing. 22 minutes to breach. 22 minutes. Not enough for reinforcements. Not enough for diplomacy. Barely enough for goodbye. Ellison stared at the widening wound where the veil-born ships gathered like shadows preparing to flood through. Then she said the words every human officer feared. Prepare gatefall protocol. Even through the comms, the silence that followed felt like grief. Commander Vale Corin did not know what gatefall protocol was. He understood it from the silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of people hearing a sentence they had spent their entire lives hoping would never be spoken aloud. Across the human fleet, Officers stopped moving for half a heartbeat. Some lowered their heads. Others stood straighter, like soldiers hearing the final line of an old oath. On the bridge of the Remembrance of Seoul, Admiral Mara Ellison did neither. She simply watched the widening wound at the center of Silent Belt 9, where reality itself had begun to peel apart like burning paper. Beyond it, more veil-born ships waited in patient darkness, not rushing, not afraid. They knew time favored them. It always had. Commander Vale stepped closer to the tactical feed. Explain. Ellison's expression did not change. The gate cannot be closed from this side. The ring only slows expansion. To seal it permanently, someone has to take the memory core through the breach and detonate it inside the source field. Vale stared at her. A suicide mission. No, she said quietly. Something worse. She touched the console, and a new display appeared. Human records, fragmented and solemn. The first Gatefall mission. 2 centuries old. A fleet sent into the wound during the collapse of Seoul. No return signals. No wreckage. No survivors. No names. Not because they died. Because once they crossed, reality itself lost permission to remember them. Crew manifests blanked. Family records erased. Children returned home and could not explain why a chair at dinner felt empty. People vanished from history, while those who loved them still stood alive. Vale felt cold all the way through. They were forgotten. Ellison nodded once. Completely. Death leaves grief. This leaves absence. No medals. No monuments. No certainty they had ever existed. Only instinct. Only the shape of missing. That is Gatefall. On the bridge of the Vigil of Dawn, nobody moved. Lieutenant Saris looked sick. You're asking people to volunteer for erasure. Ellison's answer was simple. I'm asking them to protect worlds that will never know their names. Before Vale could respond, Chancellor Oren cut into the channel. Then coalition forces will join you. Every eye turned. The Chancellor stood straighter than before. The old weight of shame sharpened into something harder. We failed humanity once because we called fear wisdom. I will not repeat that mistake while pretending it is leadership. Admiral Ellison's gaze narrowed. This is not your debt to pay. No, Oren replied. It is our responsibility. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vale stepped forward. The Vigil of Dawn volunteers. Saris turned toward him sharply. Commander, he met her eyes. If humanity stood alone for 2 centuries because we were too afraid to stand with them, then history can do better this time. He looked to his crew. I won't order anyone into this. If you leave now, you leave with honor. No one moved. Lieutenant Ilian gave a weak, humorless smile. I was supposed to spend this week complaining about patrol duty. Saris exhaled slowly. I still plan to, but apparently after we save existence. Around the bridge, one by one, officers nodded, not because they were fearless, because some moments made fear feel too small. Across coalition channels, more ships answered. Frigates, survey vessels, old defense platforms never designed for mythic last stands. Species who barely trusted one another yesterday now volunteering for shared disappearance. For the first time in generations, the coalition was acting like its own founding promise. Not an alliance of convenience. A civilization. Admiral Ellison watched the responses arrive in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than Vale had ever heard it. Human records teach that courage is not standing unafraid. It is standing anyway. She looked at him. Welcome to the line, Commander. Preparations moved with brutal speed. The memory core, a sphere of impossible density housed deep within the human flagship, was transferred to the strike vessels. It contained everything humanity had refused to lose. Names, histories, species archives recovered from erased worlds. Proof that civilizations had lived and mattered. If detonated inside the breach, it would force the Veilborn to face every stolen memory at once. Not just a weapon, a reckoning. As crews prepared for departure, the Veilborn sent one final transmission. No distortion, no false warmth, just clarity. The voice filled every ship. We remember Earth. Across the human fleet, people stopped breathing. The voice continued. We remember the blue sky, the silver moon, the children who looked up. Vale watched Admiral Ellison close her eyes. For the first time, pain broke through her armor. The Vale-born were not threatening them. They were proving possession. They remembered Earth because they had taken it. And then came the final sentence. Come inside, children of Ash. Let US finish the story. Silence followed. Not fear. Something colder. Something older. Admiral Mara Ellison opened her eyes. There were tears there. There was also war. She gave the final order. Launched the Gatefall fleet. And as human ships turned toward the wound in reality, Commander Vale realized the most terrifying truth of all. Humanity was not going to that gate hoping to survive. They were going because, for the first time in 200 years, the enemy had finally admitted it remembered them. The Gatefall fleet entered the wound at 4:17 Coalition Standard Time. No ceremony marked it. No speeches. No music. There were no words large enough for what was happening, and everyone involved understood that pretending otherwise would be an insult. The strike force moved in silence. Human dreadnoughts first, their scarred hulls carrying 2 centuries of unfinished grief. Coalition escorts followed beside them. Not behind, not protected, but beside, because history had already made that mistake once. Commander Vale Corrin stood on the bridge of the Vigil of Dawn as the stars bent around them. The breach did not feel like travel. It felt like being unmade. Color vanished first, then sound, then the comforting certainty that time moved forward instead of in circles. Crew members gripped consoles not because they needed balance, but because the universe on the other side no longer believed in simple things like direction. Ahead, the Vale-born waited, not as ships, as architecture. Cities made of memory theft and dead civilizations, suspended in a void where forgotten histories drifted like dust. Fragments of erased worlds floated there. Pieces of language, broken monuments, the outlines of extinct constellations. Vale saw a child's toy spinning slowly beside the remains of a cathedral that belonged to no species he recognized. This was not conquest. It was a graveyard built by arrogance. At the center stood the source field, a black star surrounded by impossible geometry, the engine that fed on remembrance itself. And around it, the Vale-born gathered, thousands, watching, waiting. Their final message came without sound. You were easier to erase when you were alone. Admiral Mara Ellison stood on the command deck of the Remembrance of Soul, facing the thing that had stolen her species' sky. She opened a fleet-wide channel. For 200 years, she said, we taught our children the names of oceans they would never see. We taught them cities buried under silence. We taught them that memory is not nostalgia, it is resistance. Her voice did not shake. We were never preserving the past. We were loading ammunition. Across the fleet, weapons armed. The memory core glowed at the center of formation like a second heart. Ellison gave the final command. Open every archive. Human ships answered first, then coalition vessels. Then something extraordinary happened. Species records from across known space, old backups, forbidden histories, lost names recovered by archivists who had refused to let silence win, began flooding into the core. The Deleni gave extinct dialects. The Mathari gave star maps older than empires. The coalition gave everything it had once hidden in shame. Civilizations choosing remembrance together, not as data, as defiance. The core became blinding. The Vale-born moved. For the first time, they attacked with fear. Reality tore apart as they surged forward, trying to stop the detonation. Human ships met them head-on. No hesitation. No retreat. The Vigil of Dawn cut through shadows larger than moons. Coalition frigates shielded human carriers. Arc-Citadels rammed enemy constructs that had no right to exist. Vale watched Lieutenant Sarislav through tears as she manually redirected power to failing shields. This is the worst assignment I've ever had. Noted. Vale said, firing thrusters straight into madness. Around them, ships vanished. Not destroyed. Forgotten. He saw one human destroyer blink out of existence mid-transmission. Its crew erased so completely the silence afterward felt personal. But this time, witnesses remained. This time, names were spoken before they disappeared. They would not vanish alone. At the center of the storm, Admiral Ellison took the Remembrance of Soul directly toward the Black Star. Commander Vale opened a private channel. "You don't have to be the one." Her answer came soft. "Yes, I do." Beyond the bridge glass, the impossible engine that had haunted humanity for centuries grew larger. She smiled then, not with vengeance, but with release. "My grandmother was born on a ship and died believing Earth was a myth she inherited. My children will stand under that sky." Warning sirens screamed. Hull integrity collapsed. The Veil-born closed in. Ellison placed one hand on the console. "Remember us correctly." And she drove the flagship into the heart of the source field. The detonation did not look like an explosion. It looked like truth. Light erupted, not outward, but backward through memory itself. Every stolen history, every erased civilization, every name denied permission to exist came rushing back like a tidal wave against the dark. The Veil-born did not die. They were remembered to death. Their lives collapsed under the weight of reality. Their structures unraveled. Their false absences filled with names. Their empire of forgetting drowned beneath everything they had tried to erase. The Black Star shattered. The gate collapsed. And for the first time in 2 centuries, silence lost. When the surviving ships emerged, the galaxy was still there. Stars returned. Maps stabilized. The nameless system had a designation again. Earth existed in Coalition records, not as a tragedy, as home. Commander Vale stood in orbit above Sol months later, staring at a blue world beneath him and the broken remains of the moon that had once nearly ended everything. Construction platforms moved like silver insects across the atmosphere. Colony ships descended through clouds. Human children, born in steel corridors between stars, ran laughing across real soil for the first time. The Coalition had restored every archive it could, and at the center of the first new city, they built no statue of victory, only a monument, Earth with its moon hole. Beneath it, one inscription: "Remember what was lost. Protect what remains. Never let silence win." Vale read it once, then again, because some victories deserve repetition. Above him, the surviving human fleet held its quiet watch. Fewer ships now, but stronger somehow. Not guardians of revenge, guardians of return. Humanity had not come back to rule the galaxy. They had returned to make sure no one else would ever be erased. And somewhere beneath the same blue sky their ancestors had fought to protect, a new generation was growing up without fear of being forgotten. That, Vale thought, was the most terrifying thing humanity had ever built. Hope